Hi, today we will be starting a new topic called discriminant of quadratic equation. Now, what is a discriminant? Now, before I go on to tell you what is a discriminant, now you recall that we learned in a quadratic equation there are various ways to solve a quadratic equation, and one of the way is using the quadratic formula. Now, if you can recall, our quadratic formula is equals to, for x will be equals to minus b plus minus square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. Now, today we will be concentrating on this part, b squared minus 4ac, and this is called the discriminant. Sometimes we use a triangle to denote it is a discriminant. Now you look at this equation. Now, if b squared minus 4ac is greater than 0, so I put a triangle sign. It can be greater than 0, it can be equals to 0, and it also can be smaller than 0. Now let's look at this case first. Now if b squared minus 4ac is greater than 0, what does it mean? That means you will have two roots. Why two roots? Now your x will have two values. Let's get the first one, the x1 will be minus b plus the square root of the discriminant over 2a, and the other one will be minus b minus the discriminant over 2a. So if we will have two roots, all right, two real roots, okay, two real roots. Now why is this called real? That means the roots is made up of real numbers. Now what will happen if b squared minus 4ac, which is called the discriminant, is equals to 0? Then you will find that square root of 0 is still 0. So you have repeated roots, alright? So your x will be equals to minus b over 2a. And we call that repeated roots. Okay, why is it repeated? Because x squared. Alright, so you say one real root, you may think that the equation is linear. Now what happens if your b squared minus 4ac is less than 0? Now if it is less than 0 means you cannot square root, because you cannot square root a negative number. Alright, so in this case you don't have any x or real values of x, so you have no real roots. No real roots. Okay. Now the next thing is, we would like to see how in each of these cases, graphically, what does it mean? Or how does it look like for the quadratic equation? For the case of two real roots, that means the quadratic graph will cut the x-axis twice in order to have two real roots. So your graph will look something like that. So this is one of the root and this is another root. Or it may look something like that. Alright. So for this graph, you also have two real roots. Now how about repeated roots? Repeated roots, there's only one root. And that happens when your discriminant is equals to 0. So to have one root, it must touch the x-axis only once. Now it can be like that or like this. It depends on the coefficient of x squared. Alright? If a is greater than 0, then it will be a minimum graph. If a is less than 0, it will be a maximum graph. Now, how about when your discriminant is smaller than 0 or no real roots? Then you find that the graph is always above the x-axis or it will always be below the x-axis. It cannot cut the x-axis or even touches the x-axis. Now let's now look at some of the examples. Alright, I will use the concept of discriminant and we will attempt a few questions. Now, the question number 1 is just a it's just a warm-up for you guys. Is to make sure that you know how to find the discriminant. Now you are given this equation, x squared minus 6x plus 9 equals to 0. Now, so what is the discriminant? The discriminant is equals to b squared minus 4ac. Now this is, your minus 6 is b, 1 will be a, and 9 is c. So you just simply substitute. So this is equals to minus 6 squared minus 4 a c. And what is this answer? This is 0. And we learned earlier, what does it mean by discriminant 0? That means it has repeated roots. Now, the next one. You are given x squared plus x plus 1 equals to 0. So what is the discriminant? So the discriminant will be equals to b squared is 1 squared minus 4ac, and this gives you an answer of minus 4, which means this equation x squared plus x plus 1 has no real roots, or the graphically it means the graph never touched the x-axis at all. Now question number 2. You are given that k x squared plus 5x plus 3 equals to 0. And you are given that this equation has repeated roots and you are asked to find the value of k. Now, so what does it mean when it has repeated roots? That means the discriminant is 0. So b squared minus 4ac is equals to 0. So the discriminant will be equals to 25. B squared, 5 squared is 25 minus 4. A is k and c is 3. And that is equals to 0. So you have 25 minus 12k is equals to 0. So k is equals to 25/12. Okay. Now let's move on to question number 3 and 4. Question number 3. Now it is given that x squared minus kx plus a quarter equals to 0 has no real roots. Now what does it mean by when it says it has no real roots? That means it does not cut the x-axis. Now if it does not have real roots, that means the discriminant is less than 0. So what is the discriminant? The discriminant will be b squared minus 4ac of this equation. And for that you get b squared, so you got k squared minus 4. Now a is 1, c is a quarter. So it must be less than 0. So for that you get k squared minus 1 is less than 0. Now you want this inequality, alright? You want k squared minus 1 to be less than 0. So if you factorize it, it will be k minus 1 into k plus 1. Now you can do a quadratic sketch of this graph. Now this is a minimum graph. This is for this inequality. It does not represent, this graph does not represent this expression. It is different. This represents the graph of the discriminant. So you have 1 here and negative 1 over here. You want this discriminant to be always less than 0. So k must be between minus 1 and 1. You want it to be always less than 0. So you take these values of x, not including minus 1 and 1. That is your final answer for question 3. Now let's move on to question number 4. Now for question number 4, it's a bit tricky. Now let's try to attempt it. Now you are given this equation, k x squared plus 6x minus 2 is equals to 0. Now it states in the question that this is a quadratic equation. This is a quadratic equation and it has real roots. Now if it has real roots, that means your discriminant must always be greater than or equals to 0. Remember the equal sign. Because it has real roots means it can have 2 real roots or repeated real roots or 2 different real roots. That means distinct real roots. Now, so you apply the discriminant inequality. So you got b squared, which is 36. Alright, 6 squared is 36 minus 4. A is k, c is minus 2. Must be greater than or equals to 0. Let's multiply it out. You got 36 plus 8k is greater than 0. That means 8k must be greater than minus 36. So you divide by 8 on both sides, and after that you can divide it by 4. So you divide the numerator, you can simplify it. Alright, so you will have 8k, it must be greater than minus 9 over 2. Now, many of you would think that this will be the final answers. Now, if you read the question properly, they said the given equation is a quadratic equation. Now, in this inequality, k includes 0 because 0 is greater than minus 9 over 2. When k is 0, this equation this will no longer be an quadratic equation because this term here will be 0 because k is 0. The equation becomes linear. Therefore, the full solution will be k must be greater than or equals to minus 9, but k does not include 0. Okay, this will be the complete solution for question 4. For that, we come to the end of this lecture. Thank you very much and have a nice day.